Janae Sharp from the Sharp Index, and I am thrilled to sit down today with Dr. Nicole Roberts. Dr.
Hello.
Dr. Nicole Roberts has been a longtime friend of mine, and she just published a book, Generosity Wins. She also has worked in human rights and public health, and with a background in neuroscience. And she's running a nonprofit right now, Feed a Billion, and she received her master's degree from the University of Chicago and her doctorate from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And your public health writing has appeared in neuroscience journals and public publications everywhere. And I'm thrilled to discuss this book and talk about generosity, and how it can impact the systems that we have in healthcare and also mental health in general. So,
Yeah, I'm really excited about this. Thank you.
so tell me how you came to write the book.
Well, that's a journey. The short version, essentially, and I'm sure your audience will understand the first part deeply. So my dissertation, some other things I've written, I submitted as potential book ideas, and I basically got this feedback of like, this is great. People don't buy healthcare books. It was so defeating and frustrating. And yeah, so I just sort of stepped away from the idea and was doing work and whatnot throughout the pandemic. I was happy, right, fulfilled, doing my own thing. And then actually, a publisher reached out to me and said, there is a guy who turned out to be my co author, Monte Wood, and he has this brilliant idea. And it's around generosity. And they pitched it to me more as a business idea. And they gave me his background, which is he's this incredible human who's so gifted in the business world. And, you know, his experience has led him to a place where he wanted to talk about when you are generous, the return on investment greatly exceeds anything else you can do, right? And we all know that if you deeply, authentically care about your employees, your clients, your peers, right, they will buy into your mission. They'll work harder. They'll give you 200%. But you have to really actually care about other people and
Right.
do the things that make them feel understood, accepted, part of the mission. And so I was intrigued, and intuitively, I'm like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And essentially, what the publisher said was he would like a co author. And the reason is because he really wanted to dig into the science. He brought the business, but he wanted someone to bring the science. And I said, well, let me talk to him and let me spend a little time in this space because I work in the human rights world and the public health, global public health. And so I really didn't know what I was getting into. And it
Famous last
only took
words. This
probably,
is like when you start a nonprofit too. You're like, I'm going to do this. It's the right thing. You're like, and here we go.
and that's it. You just nailed it. So you just gave the real answer, which is I did a little research. I met with Monty and I just went, I have no idea what we're doing, but this is exactly the right conversation to be having. And I think the world is in a place where it is hungry and thirsty to learn more, do better, be better. I think particularly these younger
Hmm.
generations, they are primed to ask questions that we, or certainly me, didn't, right? Like,
Right.
how is this made? Where does it come from? Was anyone harmed in the process? Who are the partners?
Right.
Are there bad actors? Are there they just yeah, they really think in a different way. And the technology of the world has made it possible where we can learn and connect and do so differently. And so we yeah, we thought it was the perfect topic. But no, I did not set out to write a book on generosity. It just
Right.
turned out to be the exact right topic for us, and I think the world needs it.
It's like a generosity. And I saw that there were, look, I bought the book. Let's see.
It's
Here's what I,
beautiful.
okay, but here's part of why I liked that this was coming out. Because in the nonprofit world and in general, in healthcare, there's this tension between like the mission of healing and the mission of money, you know? And so people always say, where there's a margin, there's a mission. You have all this popularity. So I was like, this is
Oh,
a
yeah.
great this is a great perspective to think about how important it is to remember generosity, especially, we get bombarded with business focus, at least, some of the people I know.
Right.
And this focus that, no one's coming to save you. And then you have whole organizations that are literally built to save people,
Yeah.
and there are, in my experience, people are showing up to change the system. They are showing up to help others. So I loved the idea that you had, just that like generosity wins even in business, you know?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And Monty, he, I mean, the stories he can tell that are both data driven and anecdotal. I mean, he's got stories in spades of business case. And actually, there's multiple in the book because a unique feature of this book, in fact, our publisher told us no one's published a book quite like it, is it's written as a business fable. So, like, Who Moved My Cheese and some of those books that, we've all had to read.
I didn't read
And
that book. I've never read it.
no, it's actually good. Do an audiobook. Do audiobook.
It's good. It's good.
Um, it's a decent story if you're just listening to it. Um, but the point is, every interview in the book is a real person.
Right.
So our fake character, Emily, goes on this journey and she interviews people from all places in life who are at their core, just they live with a spirit of generosity. And it's about how they got there, right? And then how it's affected their lives, their business, their families, and these are some incredible stories. I mean, people have been through some things, right? And they came to this place where they are through 100 different avenues. And um, I think that's what makes it so compelling is these are real stories about how generosity has impacted whether it's the bottom line, their marriage, their community engagement. I mean, people have built schools, healthcare systems, and it, it's why we ended up deciding to do it this way because there was no writing that Monty and I could do that could tell these people's stories better than them telling them themselves.
Oh, I like that. Yeah. Because people's stories really help. Tell me
Mhm.
what that was like for you as a researcher when you were researching like this, the the brain health, the neuroscience behind it. What interested you there? Was there anything that stood out?
A
Did you learn
few
anything, or
things.
were you like, I know that's already?
No, I learned so much. So on the front end, of course, we all know um, there are things, we say phrases like the helper's high. You volunteer, you donate, you do something, and you feel good. And we literally know that our hormones change, dopamine, right? All these things. So there were components that I knew, like here's the cascading events. And I've written about it many times in the past. When you do certain behaviors, here's the series of events that happen starting with your brain through your body. So we know that being kind, very broadly and vaguely, improves your mental health, improves your emotional health. It actually improves your physical health. But as you can imagine, there's not necessarily a lot of places that have a field of science or a lab or a department committed to like what happens when you feel good and you do good. It's often usually couched the other
The
direction.
altruism lab. It could be the next MIT Media Lab, right?
I love it. And it's usually done in reverse, right? We've got lots of labs on mental health disorders and those sorts of things. And it's kind of like the healthcare system, right? Prevention versus treatment. So where
Yeah.
I kind of think of us on the prevention side of things.
Yeah.
So what shocked me is a few things. I'm sure more will come to me as we talk, but first and foremost, this concept of like improvement across the board. There's nothing harder than behavior change. Our brain fights change because it's just so difficult. When people set out to do, and we create challenges in the book as well, like a 30-day challenge of
I was
each
going to
day.
ask about, we're
Yeah,
going to have to talk about
do
these because we should give our
do
audience a challenge, right?
sure, and
Okay, but
but
what
to do
happens to your brain when you
something
do that?
generous, right? And
Right.
it doesn't have to be towards other people. It can also be towards yourself. Self-generosity is half the equation. A lot
So
of people,
15 of the days I can take a nap is what you're telling me.
yeah, seriously.
I
But
love
think about it.
naps.
You have four children. You come to your children as a whole, as I only have one, right? I come to my son and you come to your children as a different person if you've had a nap. Your
It's true.
patience, the grace you give, the
Yes.
words
Every
and
now and
tone
then
you
my
give.
kids are like, Mom,
You
have
need to
you
go lay
thought
down.
about taking a nap?
You need
And
to
I'm
go lay
like,
down.
well, you know what? And we have some like soft guidance when someone tells you to take like a time out, you should. Like when someone casually is like, maybe go on a walk, like in the family, just do it. Like
I
honestly,
mean,
because you
you should
might,
have gone on a walk half an hour ago.
yeah, you should have gone
Um,
on a walk a half hour ago. Okay.
yeah.
So what happens
So
when you
exactly.
do that?
So, well, a lot of things happen and you really do improve. Like I said, mentally, emotionally, physically. Like your body responds. Helper's high is real. It can be measured. Um, you also, a number of things open up that I had a hard time accepting, like months and months and months of writing this book, interviewing neuroscientists, behavioral scientists, digging in the literature. And a lot of it, the problem is because it's not well defined, there's a lot of synonyms. So you've really got to start finding like, so and so said this and so said this. They're getting at the exact same thing. They're just saying it differently.
Hmm.
And essentially, one of the things that shocked me the most was that when you do good, consistent, you are actually more open to good things happening to you.
It's
There's
like, is
this
that like
thing
the
that
luck
happens in
principle?
your
Is
brain
that
where
like luck?
it is, it is. So the more you put out, your body and brain are more accepting that good things can happen. You are actually more open to gifts and you feel more deserving of things that come your way. Like it, in fact, my co-author in his first draft of some of his ideas, he called it attract success. And his concept was the more you put out, the more comes your way. But the reason I brought up self-generosity right before that is because it doesn't just mean give till you are absolutely tapped out. Because like with, as you're talking about like with the nap, I hate the expression, but it's very much true, right? Which put on your own face mask before you try and help the people around you, right? If the
Hmm.
plane's going down. If you're not operating and working from a place where you can give, you're not helpful to anyone. And I don't
Right.
mean you constantly live in a place of abundance. That's not the real world. Some days are really hard. Some phases of
I
life are
mean, maybe
really
some
hard.
people are like that and bless them.
Some people are, but not
Yeah.
not all of us, and certainly
Yeah.
not all the time. But there are things you can intentionally do to be generous with others and yourself. And the other thing I really want to define is I don't mean donate, I don't mean give up all kinds of things. Sometimes the most generous thing you could do to another person, for another person, is a smile.
Hmm.
I mean, it is so simple. You listening to someone, sharing your time. I mean, we talk a lot about time, talent, treasure. Time's the greatest. You'll never get it back. When you give of your time to someone else, it's the most generous thing you can do. And it can literally change their life. Feeling heard, feeling seen can change someone's life. So
Yeah.
it
I
is
think it's
simple.
critical.
It is so simple. And so when we say these things, and it's in the book, but we don't mean grand gestures every day. I don't mean turning your
Although
life
you can give
upside
people
down.
big presents. Just
You
kidding.
can, you
You know,
can.
it's up to your
And
capacity.
right, but grand gestures can be all kinds of things.
Right.
Or the most impactful thing you can do is something really small. And it matters. It really does matter. And it creates this ripple effect. That
Hmm.
was something that surprised me, that I couldn't find a clear definition or data. But what I found is that in every single interview we did, and this is very much my like dissertation sort of work coming back out, but I had collected all these notes. And as I said, I went looking for a lot of synonyms. Every person we interviewed, included in the book and not, talked about karma, ripple effect, like expanding impact. They used all these different ways to explain the exact same thing. And every single person believed that whether it was a smile or a big grand gesture, that everything they did, they just trusted that everyone who saw it would then go do something. The person who was impacted by it went and did something. Uh, it, and everyone very much believed that the karmic effect came back to them.
Right.
And that's where what Monte really meant by that ROI in the beginning from the business side is that when you put out goodness towards others, it will always come back to you. It
Right.
may not come back in the exact same way. It may not look like a check written to you. It may not look like a salary increase or a promotion, but in time, it will definitely come back to you. And in
Let's
fact, our definition, we redefine generosity, and it's, giving with no expectation of return. And I think
which
that's
is
part of the
hard,
key.
right?
It is hard. It is really hard, but it's like a gift. I mean, in fact, it is a gift. The
Right.
moment you give it, the other
Although when
person
my
takes
mom
it.
gives me gifts, they're really just her items that live in my home.
Sometimes, I sometimes think my dad gives me things like, I don't want this in my house anymore. So
Right.
you should
Right.
have it.
I want, but
Or,
I did want to talk about two separate things that you bring up. One is I want to talk about kind of that balance, especially in healthcare, between giving and like giving too much when we talk about it, because we work with a lot of people with, um, real burnout, and they're,
yeah.
just no matter how much you give, it's not going to be enough. And then I also wanted to talk more about this idea about karma, and you mentioned something earlier about you know, the digital world and thinking about
Mhm.
what this means um, for younger people or for people who are in crisis. So maybe we could start by talking about, in healthcare, they talk a lot about people who are burned out. Over half of physicians are
Yep.
not happy. And I mean, it's consistent. It's worse for some of them. And I think a lot of people get into the the healthcare profession with this idea of healing, and they
That's it
have
all.
a generous spirit, right?
Mhm.
And there's some real dissonance there
There is.
between the
Yeah.
intentions and the reality. And so I didn't know if there's like a story in the book about it, because I haven't read the whole book, but like um do you address some of that balance? It sounds like
We
you talk about
do.
self-care, you know.
Yeah. So we do, but not in the exact way you're asking. So we intentionally included a chapter um, from a woman who I happen to know personally. But it gets to this. But again, each chapter is an interview, so they tell their own story. It's not in the healthcare field specifically, but essentially, very true story. And I have been present during this part of her story. This woman had the kind of marriage everyone aspires to have. Like she literally still calls her husband her wingman, and he passed 2 years ago. And she says, like, when I lost my wingman, I just started crying right there in the interview. But 2 weeks, I think, after she lost her husband, her dog that was 14 passed away. And I want to say a couple weeks after that, her other dog passed away.
Rude. I mean, that's sad.
Right. Like
Life really
everyone in
chose
her
violence. Yeah.
like everyone in her immediate home care world just left. And
Mm.
she gives and gives and gives. And she literally did. And she cared for her husband at home until he passed. They decided to do it at home and not in the hospital after a while. But the point is, she was standing at her kitchen window one day and realized everything became very pixelated. And she basically had to like walk her way to the couch. She laid down and she said, in that moment, she essentially heard God say, like, you've given too much. Like you were completely tapped out. And for these last couple of years, she just gave of herself in every way possible for others. And she just reached a point where there was nothing left. And she realized personally, professionally, how exhausted and burnt out she was. And she had to call a timeout. And it wasn't convenient, right? I mean, with
Right.
everything else in life, there's no good time as a businesswoman, essentially, with all this other stuff, right? to call a timeout, and she had to just say, I've got to reset, recalibrate, like my life has to change, and I have to grieve. I finish grieve, not finish grieving, but like where I am in this process, like all these things. And I really, really, really wanted that interview in there because the way she talks about it is through a personal story,
Hmm.
but she hit so many highlights of people at various places in their life and careers where they just take on too much, or they're not giving, or they're not getting enough back, and what happens physically, mentally, emotionally again. And we we talk about it in different ways, that story included, of just, you have to care for yourself. And we go out of our way, I have the copy here, but like we call it self generosity. And the definition is any action one takes that moves them closer to becoming the person they aspire to be. Overindulgence is not self generosity. So we're not saying
Unless that's who you want to
stay
be,
up,
right? You want
right? Right. But
no,
well,
self-generosity. That's like when they talk about self-care being more than just going to the spa. It's also like take
exactly.
care of the things you need to take care of.
Oh,
He's
oh, all
beautiful. I
right.
love kiddo. I think we already know I love babies.
Yeah,
I love
yeah, yeah.
presents.
Well, yeah.
I should say like gifts are my love language. So I'm like, oh yeah, this book is
Right.
like,
Oh.
yes, I always want to
Well,
give people presents.
that's wonderful. It's so thoughtful. And in theme, right? It's very generous because you give of yourself in a way that is thoughtful and it's about that person. But then they have a piece of you. Like, it's so incredibly kind and it sticks with people. They remember it forever. Um, but just to follow up on that self generosity, the reason I keep reiterating, how important it is because, right, we can go to any bookstore and there are more self-help books than maybe any other genre out there, and it's not
And none of
about,
them are good. Just kidding.
well, it's not about self-help, some secret formula. What it's really about, the formula is as simple as being good to yourself. If you are working towards doing things that allow you, even if it's a nap, right, that allow you to be a better you, that makes all the difference. It's not that you need a pedicure every so often. Great, do those things for yourself, but self generosity is so much more. And sometimes I think it's grace. I mean, right? There's a previous life in which I would have been so stressed out that there's a baby making noise while I'm trying to do an interview, and
Because
it's the
heaven forbid
holidays.
people know that you have a child.
Well, right, but I'm at a different place right now, and thankfully it's you and your audience. But we're at the holidays. There's people in the house. It's absolute chaos, and the alternative is I ask a bunch of other people to rearrange their activities, or you and I postpone, and we don't get to have this conversation. So I
Right.
chose to do it this way,
I'm
and
glad you chose that.
well, and,
I'm
and it's
glad.
wonderful that you are the kind of person that I felt completely safe doing that, right? Those
Good.
those things right there are exactly what this book is about. You can do even small things, which to me, allowing him to be present and make noise is huge. And to you, based on knowing you and your family, like, I'm sure it's grace that you wish people would have given you, right? And so you're doing it for someone else. That is
I
so incredibly generous of you.
I feel like having a baby that like went to events profoundly changed my perspective just about like
Oh, we love having him
everyone.
around.
Everyone. First of all,
I love having
he was
him
like
around.
he was like unnaturally calm, okay? Second of all, like I could take him to like a 3-hour lunch and it wouldn't be bad. But second of all, like there were a few instances where people wanted him there. I remember I went to a conference in Boston and it was a health tech company. They have money, but the women kind of were like, I could have never done that. They like went out of their way to say how awful it was for them, but they were
Yeah.
angry at me for being there. And then I went to a different, and it was such a negative experience, like so negative. And honestly, he was sick, I wasn't sleeping, just a train wreck, right? But I remember that less than I remember people just being so upset that it had been so hard for them. But then I remember going to another event
Yeah.
right after that, which happened to be like one of their competitors' events. And like the chief technology officer of this company, it's like a publicly traded company, was like, I'm so glad you brought the baby. Like, and like picked him up, you know, and like just wanted, he just loves babies, you know. Some people are baby people. And we had been friends for several years. And just like that difference between people who wanted something positive and people who just you were annoying them because they had had a hard time and had to like pretend they didn't have kids, or you know, whatever it is, that they've carried this pain with them, and you should
Yeah.
too, you know. And I feel like it changed my perspective in some ways because I didn't really have a choice in some ways, you know.
Yep.
Like I chose that a little bit, but also like my kid's dad died. Like, who's the other parent? Like, we, I think as parents, we do a lot of arranging, but at the same time, I felt like I was more able to bring him because of that, you know?
Yes. Well, and you were facing just incredible challenges and circumstances. I honestly don't know how you did it.
Should
To this
I?
day, I still don't know how you did it. But I will say, I think everything you just said is right. And I have experienced all of it in different ways, but he just went in the other room. But
Yeah.
um, it is, yeah, on the tough side, I think I've also experienced some people in organizations, and the two that I've experienced are either people who don't have children, which I didn't until this was the past year, uh, or people who went through something similar to what you described and are like, this is sort of a rite of passage. Like you do one or the other, you don't do them in tandem. And it is a rare case in which I hesitate, but also kind of say, thanks, pandemic. Um, you know, you went through something so incredibly difficult, but there's this other parallel world in which like the rest of us went through this pandemic, obviously you did too, but like it changed childcare, it changed home dynamics, it changed work dynamics, and people got used to this Zoom, right? You and I used to see each other 5, 6 times a year, and it's because we had our consistent number of
And I do miss
events. And
that.
every
You know what? I do
I do
miss
too. I do
I was
miss
an
that. And
extrovert,
every
you know. A month into the pandemic, I was the one calling everyone being like, "Hey, how you doing?" I'm
right,
not
I
okay.
know, and thank God for people like you. Um, yeah,
All the
I
when you call it the pandemic, I call it when my introverted friends took power. You know, they were like, "We've
yes.
been waiting for this day all our lives."
Or there's some of us in the middle who
In the middle.
discovered a whole other version of
Yeah,
ourselves.
just a
I
different
thought I was
time.
an extrovert.
Hmm.
I really did because I thrive on meeting, talking to people, and yet what I realized is I oh, this was so horrible. I thrive on talking to people I'm really interested in and I'm fascinated
Oh,
by. And as someone in public health, that can be any sector, right? I weirdly like will talk to someone about light. And like in the UK, they have right to light and how buildings are built because humans need light.
I love that.
And or it could be transportation, which otherwise I haven't driven a car in 20 years, but I'm fascinated to learn about transportation and what it
First of all,
means
I'm
for healthcare.
impressed. I
And
hate
so
driving.
I find that I get yeah, I get really like excited and worked up. At the same time, what I have found is that if I'm not in those environments and I'm around just I live in DC, so people can make some assumptions and judgments about what I'm saying. But like I found that if I'm just out and having to like talk to certain people, like to just be out, they suck all the energy out of me because I'm not at all interested. or I think what they're fascinated by or their work is not, I don't want to say it's not meaningful, but I just, the political world is very different. And
Right.
so all that is to
I
say,
mean, I feel like
when the
there's
pandemic,
there's there's something to be said there though, because some people are, some things are cutthroat, some things are politics, literally,
yeah, they are. And that for me is just a place where I find I would rather be home alone and quiet than out doing that. So I thought I was an
Lobbyists take
extroverted
note.
extrovert, but it's because I was so blessed to be in healthcare spaces or spaces in which I was taking what people were talking about and thinking about all the ways it impacted health. Once the pandemic hit and I realized I could pick and choose what conversations I got to have, it was, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not an extrovert. I think I'm an extroverted introvert. I don't know. Like it's this weird world where now, especially having a baby, right? To get dressed and put on makeup and go spend a few hours sort of BSing was, I've got to really like what we're talking about and what we're doing. And I've got
Right.
to
Yeah.
think like we're going to make the world better. If it's just to go stand and talk and get bumped around in a crowded place, I'm not at all interested. Not at all.
No, no, you're not.
We've gone like 100 directions.
No, I think let's think about that because okay, we had this pandemic. Um, People were able to be more selective. Mental health's worse than ever. And
Yes. Yeah.
I think the needs of like my children and the needs after that are a little bit different, and people are kind of um, in different places with that, right?
I think they're a lot different. I really do. I think they're a
Yeah,
lot different. I mean, I think as human beings, we are, the degrees of difference are almost none. I mean, you can look at
yeah,
people that we would think existed hundreds of years ago and didn't know anything. We're, I mean, one need only look at pandemic behavior and know we haven't changed at all. And yet we are in this remarkable place. And I don't say that to make us feel special, but if you look at the, we'll just say technological progress from 5, 6, 7, 800 years ago to present, and in the last 20 years, right? Like the acceleration of what's happening and how people interact, how you mentioned your kids, right? Like I can't imagine cell phones didn't exist when you and I were born.
my kids are introverts. Okay,
Well,
but keep going.
but to no, but to
That's
the point, like
yeah,
cell phones, computers, when you and I were born, didn't exist. Look at where we are. By the time they're our age, who knows, right? The acceleration of what's happening,
right.
mental health is in a terrible place globally, not
Hmm.
just here, right? This isn't just a US problem. We have our own problems, but it's a global challenge. Children are learning differently, they're interacting differently, adults are learning and interacting very differently. Um, there really are some major pivots happening,
Hmm.
and we're not going to stop them. So,
Right.
right, it's how do we deal? How do we prepare people for the world? How do we help them do better, be better, feel better?
Hmm.
And those are real challenges because we're having to help these younger generations grow and learn in spaces that we never had to learn and grow in.
Right. And you talk about that in the book, the future
Yeah,
and tech,
yeah,
the last chapter you mentioned, like talking about some of these, the impacts of
yeah.
technology and the impacts of the history that we're bringing with us are really heavy for children. And also, I I liked that perspective that it's also bringing um, potential. When I think about advocacy work too, um,
Yes.
people are becoming more aware that like your physician is twice as likely as most people to die by suicide. People are becoming aware of hate crimes, of like things that would continue to happen if we didn't have
Do
some of
most
these
people know
things.
that?
I said people are becoming aware.
Okay. Okay.
I
Sorry.
mean,
Just I feel like
I've just
I wrote
started
a Forbes
like,
piece not too long ago. And in fact, I interviewed you as one of
yeah,
the people for that piece. The responses I've gotten are shock, like complete shock
complete shock.
that the doctors in this world are not all right. And the healthcare workers but I wrote it specifically about physicians, but people were shocked. Like I've gotten more feedback on that of like, is this true? And I'm like, well, I wouldn't have written it if it weren't true, right? Like, but
You're like, no, I literally made it up
yeah, I don't
for
think enough
no reason,
people.
actually. It's not just about knowledge, though. A lot of it is about the nature of suicide and the shame that we're bringing with us. Like, so you're not, when someone comes to you
Sure,
and says, like, is
of
this
course.
true? They're not just coming to you because they don't believe a data set. They're coming to you because, like, we don't have the language to talk about
Yeah,
shame and death. Like, and even
as a
going back
culture.
to your book, like
Yeah,
when we feel threatened by a certain thing, like something as basic as like, do you want to stay alive? Which is, you know, um, survival of the fittest. Like when those concepts are threatened, like we shut down. Like we don't proceed and give the same love to those people or the same support as someone who's died in a different way. So I think sometimes people are reaching out to try to understand that is what I found. Like, and
okay.
part of why I started my nonprofit actually was that people would come to me, every single physician that I talked to, if they found out how John died, they had a story of someone that had died either in residency or recently, or they had thought about dying by suicide. Like every single one needed to tell their story. Like, and it's just this massive dearth, like just this
And there's,
need.
I would add to that, I, all of that. Oh, just all of that resonates, and I would just add that there's. I'm trying to think of how to word this appropriately. So the two areas that I've written a lot about when it comes to suicide, death by suicide, and ideation, the medical community and firefighters. My dad's a fireman, my grandpa's a fireman. Like I come from a history of firefighters and first responders, and so I sort of put them in a bucket together. But those numbers are staggering, and I have also seen the pushback, and I hesitate to use that word, but I am going to use it, from the leadership in those communities.
Yeah.
I was shocked when I first started writing about firefighter and first responder death by suicide and the lack of resources. When you think of just like hospitals, right? Every community has them in different capacities, and fire service, EMTs, right? They exist everywhere. They get into those things because they are of service. They want to help. Right? There's a lot of parallels, and the amount of response I got from leadership, from union leadership on down, saying like, "Why did you write this?" I'm like, because the numbers are double and triple the population average. Like, there's a
Right.
problem here. And as someone who grew up in the space, like I've seen it. I know the number of losses that have existed in my own family's, extended, because especially in the firefighter community, like those
Yeah,
are
that's your
extended
family.
family. You
Yeah.
live with them 24 hours at a time. And in hospital, like you work in these places where you're in shifts, and like the communities you build are those are really meaningful codependent relationships to
Right.
do your job well. And I was shocked at the pushback I got, just to say, from leadership, who still, that stigma, it's like, if people, and I'm going to say under, right, but only because they're the reps and the elected people to speak on behalf of these communities, but to see them not want to talk about these things was just really shocking to me,
Right.
as to want to provide care and more resources trickle down, it's like they're afraid that it looks bad on them if the people around them that they're supposed to be taking care of and representing,
they're guilty.
aren't okay.
They're
Like
guilty.
it's been a really troubling space to write about.
Which is why it's important to write about it, I think. I want to close by talking about the 30 steps, the steps. Like, what's the challenge that we need to do?
That's a great question. I mean, in the book, what we do, and then on our website, generositywins.us.us, we thought that was better than a com, right? It's us. We're all in this together. Generositywins.us. We have a 30-day challenge, and our 30-day challenge includes a journal that you can print out. It's under resources, generositywins.us/resources. But I would say there are three. I'm going to say three. And the first one is that 30-day challenge. And
Okay.
the reason we set this is because today, we're in December. This is the perfect time to start being more generous. It is the giving season. But each day, our point is for you to write down something. Again, it can be itty bitty, it can be huge. Something you did that you feel great about, that you did for someone else or for yourself.
Oh, that's cool.
And then how it made you feel. And what we have found is that if you do that for 30 days, and we know that it takes a couple weeks for behavior change to start to register, for it to start to feel right, to break a habit, to start a new habit, you need at least a couple weeks. So 30 days is the
Old
perfect
enough.
amount of time that if you do this consistently, to see how you feel. And we've also asked that people share them with us if they're willing. We've had a couple submitted, and I literally was in tears reading some of these. And I don't say that to be cheesy. I say it because one person who actually works in a hospital, he went out of his way to thank someone for 30 days. Like and it wasn't 30 consecutive days because it was when he was at work, but for 30 days at work to thank someone. And it could be the person washing the windows, to whatever. And he told a couple stories, and one of them was actually someone who was washing windows, and he stopped her, and he said her English was limited, but they proceeded to have a conversation in which he told her, like, this hospital operates because you're here.
Mm-hmm.
It feels better, it looks better, it's sanitary. Like you doing this does all these things
Right.
for the hospital and for the people who enter this hospital. And she actually cried and hugged him and said no one had ever stopped her to even talk to her, let alone thank her or to share how her role made the hospital run.
Right.
And that
I
one
love
to
that.
me was just like, I got to the end of the email. I was like, it was worth it, right? This is the only email I ever get. Writing's was worth it. So I do think the 30-day challenge matters. It sounds simple, but to just do something every day and write it down and how it made you feel, I think you really will see an impact on the back end, and it changes how you look at things. The other thing I would encourage is, because we are in the giving season, our goal, it's a very lofty goal, but our goal is to, in the next few years, make this the most gifted book in modern history. Mm-hmm. We won't beat the Bible. I'm not trying to beat the Bible. It's the most gifted book, but
I didn't realize that. It makes sense. It's like one of those things where you're like, oh, that's obvious.
And I said it was actually a challenge. We told the publisher, we said, we want to be the most gifted book in history. And they're like, okay, we support your big ideas, but like, you're not gonna beat them. And we said,
They're
okay,
like,
fine.
simmer down. Okay.
Simmer down over there. But my purpose in saying that is, not only when you read a book about stories and ways to be more generous and make your life better, are you giving a gift to yourself, but you can give that gift to someone else. And I think we all know, whether it's a young person who's in an exploratory phase or graduating and moving to the next, whatever phase of life, or someone who's just in, for me, I think it's so powerful for people in transition. Mm-hmm. When you're thinking about what comes next, I've been surprised by the number of people who are entering retirement and are like, I focused on all these metrics And now I want to do something better with my time in the world. And I have the bandwidth. So we would encourage anyone who can gift the book to please gift the book. So that's a challenge.
Yeah, see if they have
And
enough
the
money,
last,
they can give the book away every day of the 30 days, right? That could be,
I love
we'll
it.
do
Yeah,
this. I'll do this online after we post the episode. We'll like do it for 30
I
days.
love it. It's
Yeah.
brilliant. I love that. Thank you for your support.
I want to thank you
I
too for like for this work that you're doing and also for, for your work that you've done for human rights and um for making that more accessible for people.
thank you. That
'Cause that
actually means a
matters.
lot. To the conversation we had about those kinds of words matter because I have reached burnout a few times when you work in some of the spaces I do, especially around things like human trafficking
Right.
and food insecurity. It's very, very easy to begin to feel like it doesn't matter how hard you work or what you do or how much you give of yourself, like it's not making a difference or enough of a difference. Uh, so it really, really matters when people, it's not about the
Yeah.
acknowledgement, but about like there is an impact and it
Right.
it,
It's
it
it's hard
does
to see
ripple
when the
out.
need is so big,
Yeah,
stuff
well,
with
it
like,
feels overwhelming,
yeah,
right? It feels overwhelming. But it's often a simple flip of how you are thinking about something, which is the burden or need or challenge in front of us is so great that one person can't change this.
right,
But when you flip it and think about it a different way, I mean, one meal a day can make all the difference in the world.
right. We talk
One
about
act
that
of kindness a
the
day can make all
people,
the difference in the world.
the the physicians and individuals who are the most effective and the most empathetic are also the most at risk to be burned out. And I think it's because they see the overall need and they want to give so much. So
Yeah.
finding that balance, finding the balance of generosity and, as you put in the book, like self-compassion, um, is critical.
So for those in the field, of course, thank you. You do give of yourself every day, and your family does too, because everything that you do, right, work and home are not that separate. You bring things home, you take things to work. We're humans, we can't help it. A few sociopaths here and there, right, and compartmentalize completely, but most of us,
We won't worry about them, but we will be
we
tagging you on Facebook.
right. Uh, but so thank you, and then second to that, yeah, I would just say it's easy to say set boundaries, know your limits, and it's not
Your
right.
kid
That's
doesn't
not
care. Toddlers don't care about your limits.
right. Right. Sometimes your bosses don't care about right. So
True.
that's it feels flippant to say those kinds of things, but to know you're having an impact matters. So I guess I would say then to the people around those providing care, be sure to let them know they're making a difference. It can be a kind word, a simple thank you. It actually matters because
Right.
it becomes overwhelming and daunting very quickly. And when you're doing it day in and day out, and we live in a space where patients aren't always thankful for what's happening, the care team around you isn't always thankful. People are overworked, they're got their own problems. Um, Letting people know that what the work they're doing is very, very meaningful goes a long way in helping people get through the day
Yeah. True. All right. So we're going to
and
start
come back
this.
tomorrow and do
Yes,
it
we're
all
going to
over
start
again.
this. I'm glad. So get your book, Generosity Wins by Monte
Okay.
Wood and Dr. Nicole Roberts.
Oh, yeah, I have one too. Look at that.
Yeah,
I have a
see, we can
copy
hold
too.
it up. It could be like a book club.